Salute me. Now, the general's voice sounded like thunder. He stood before the guard in the Alcazar, his eyes blazing with irritation. Do you realize who I am? He shouted loudly, but the guard did not budge. No reaction. No respect. He remained like a stone, his gaze never leaving the horizon. The general didn't even notice how his pride began to break into pieces. This is not military service. This is a show, he thought. He decided to come closer, to take one more step toward the man who was supposed to obey his orders. The general's hand reached for the guard's shoulder. But something changed. The guard quickly cut off his hand as if it were a knife. I'm sorry, General. Physical contact is forbidden. His words were calm, but they had a force that made the general stop. What will the general do now? Will he break the resistance of this stone man? And why would this moment make him rethink his entire career? Do you want to know what happened next? Then subscribe, and let's find out together. We had just arrived in Alcazar. I was among the tourists gathered at the gate when I saw General Jose Valencia, a tall, exemplary officer in an impeccable uniform, get out of a black SUV. He got out of the car, looking around the area as if it didn't deserve his attention, until his eyes landed on one of the guards. I immediately realized that this was not just a routine security check or visit. This was the moment when he decided to test the guard, to break his peace, to show that even in a place as holy as the Alcazar, rules can be broken. The general looked at the guard, who stood like a statue, and began to walk toward him. Everyone around him was a little wary, but no one seemed to realize what was going to happen next. I saw his officer looking around nervously, ready for anything, but he could do nothing. Do you know who I am? The general said hoarsely as he approached the guard. I am your senior officer. There was no reaction. The guard did not move. He just stood there, not looking at him, just looking forward. His gaze was petrified, like a stone. It was unusual, very unusual. The general continued. Do you know who I am, or not? I order you to salute now. Do you understand? But the guard stood still, did not budge. Tourists began to whisper. Some laughed quietly, thinking it was just another theatrical performance. But the general could no longer restrain himself. He approached the guard, as if he wanted to understand why he was unresponsive. The general's fingers reached for the guard's shoulder, ready to make contact. But suddenly, right before my eyes, something happened that made all hearts stop. The guard didn't just stand there. He stopped the general with a single movement of his hand. Without a word, without emotion. It was as if he just felt that touching him was breaking a rule, and so he did it like a true professional. I'm sorry, General, he said in a steady voice. Physical contact with you is forbidden. I'm asking you to step back. I saw the general freeze in place. There was anger and embarrassment in his eyes, but also a bit of surprise. It was obvious. He did not know how to react. He was convinced that in this situation he had to subjugate everyone, even the one on duty, as part of the tradition. None of us knew what would happen next. I saw the tourists taking a step back, realizing that what we were witnessing could be more than just a diplomatic skirmish. It was a moment when a man did not break his steadfastness, but on the contrary, the general had to change his mind. He stood there not knowing what to do next. I realized that he was still trying to understand how it was possible to react to his order in such a way. But the guard was adamant. And from that moment on, I realized that the Alcazar was not just a place for festive ceremonies. It was a temple of discipline, where even the biggest officer could be put in his place. Everyone around me became quiet. I noticed how the general's gaze became as cold as ice. It seemed that his pride had received its first serious blow. It was an invincible wall that he could not overcome. He was no doubt confident that everyone who wore the uniform would respect him for his rank, but here, in front of him, stood a guard who did not stray from the path and did not break protocol. And this is his defeat. But a general officer would not be a general if he won without a fight. He gathered himself, took a step back, and looked at the guard as if he was looking for a weakness. This was his last attempt to break the man's fortitude. The tone of his voice became even harsher. You will not even be able to understand who is standing in front of you. I have commanded troops on several continents. I have seen my comrades in arms fall, and I have earned respect. And you just stand there and don't say anything? I could not believe my ears. The general, who had survived many battles, was now throwing these accusations at the guard. It looked as if he was trying to throw the guard off balance by using his strength, experience, and authority. But the guard still stood there, not responding to the words. His appearance was so calm that I began to doubt whether this man could really feel no pressure. We all seemed to realize that this was not just a test of discipline. The general did not back down. He began to walk around the guard, moving his hands, trying to somehow elicit a response. I could see his fingers trembling with anger. He obviously felt defeated, but his pride did not allow him to just retreat. The military must be prepared for any situation, he continued, speaking almost in a raised voice. If you can't recognize who the real commander is here, then you have no value. This is not just a show for tourists. This is a serious army. And you, boy, can stand at your post, but you can't fulfill the basic rules of respect. The guard stayed on his post. It wasn't just discipline, it was more than that. It was a rule he couldn't break. His gaze, that unwavering, focused look, was like a symbol of everything he represented. It seems that the general himself began to lose control of the situation. His appearance changed with every step he took around the guard, with every word he uttered. He tried to humiliate the man, but the guard was not going to give in. "Salute me." The general's voice was no longer just an order. It was something more: anger, a desire to show his power, his strength. "I order you to salute." But the guard did not move, did not say a word. He didn't even look at the general, he just stared straight ahead. That's when I realized that this was not just a test of discipline. It was a clash of two worlds. The world of the general, where his words and orders had to be obeyed without question, and the world of the guard, where his duties to the crown and protocol were above any personal pride or authority. And although the general tried to turn the situation into a personal one, the guard still stood, silently proving that his vocation was not to pay homage to a military title, but to carry out the orders given to him by higher powers. It seemed that all he could do now was to show his steadfastness. And at that moment I realized that the general was losing. He had not broken the guard. And the more he tried, the more he fell into the trap of his anger. The situation was on the verge of exploding. The general stood there, nervously glancing at the static figure of the guard. His face, which had recently been confident, now expressed a mixture of irritation and embarrassment. He was on edge. Every nerve in his body was screaming to force this man to obey. Yet the guard continued to stand there like a stone. "You can't treat me like this," the general said, trying to shout down his own surprise and anger. "I've commanded on the battlefield. I've dealt with real soldiers. Do you think your rules have any weight here in this museum? They don't." The guard remained in his place. His gaze remained calm and emotionless. I noticed how the other tourists began to notice that this was not just a minor incident. They were whispering quietly, filming everything on their phones. Someone had already begun to realize that something more was going on here than just a disciplinary quarrel. The tourists were retreating, leaving room for what was to be the culmination of the day. This was not just a game. It was a moment when two forces collided in their purest form. The military discipline of a general who had earned respect on many continents, and the unyielding resilience of a guard who faithfully performed his duties no matter who stood before him. "Maybe it's not you, soldier, I should be talking to," the general said with a challenge. "Maybe I should be talking to your command. What are you doing here if you can't show basic respect for a senior officer?" But even this did not happen. The guard did not move. He stood there, and his silence became heavier than any word. I felt the atmosphere begin to fill with tension. Here, among the sunshine and the majestic walls of the Alcazar, it was not only about discipline, but also about something deeper, about honor, about trusting one's own principles, even if they went against external pressure. Then the general took a step toward him, almost so close that I feared something unstoppable might happen. He raised his hand and seemed intent on touching the guard. I heard some of the tourists holding their breath. But suddenly, without warning, the guard moved, removing the general's hand from his shoulder. It was such a sharp and yet smooth movement that I could not understand how he did it. He didn't use force, didn't break the space, but simply stopped the general, clearly and categorically. "I'm sorry, General," he said calmly, "but physical contact with you is prohibited. I ask you to step back." The tourists standing nearby were shocked. Some even whispered quietly, "He has no right to behave like that." But I noticed that there was nothing aggressive or even disrespectful in his words. It was a simple statement of fact. He was just doing his job as it should be. At that moment, I saw the general standing there, silently looking at the guard, and something changed in his eyes. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. It was a meeting of two different worlds, two systems that could not be compatible in any way. The general obviously did not know how to respond to such stubbornness. He was used to being respected for his rank. But here, in front of him, was a man who did not obey rank or authority, but simply followed a protocol that was more important than any words or orders. "You don't know who you're talking to," the general said, trying not to lose the last vestiges of his authority. But the guard was no longer looking at him. His attention remained fixed on the horizon, tacitly confirming his unbreakable steadfastness. And it was at that moment that I saw the general, having lost all his efforts, realize that he had lost the battle. Something changed in his expression. His anger subsided a little, and understanding appeared in his eyes. The guard did not break. He did not compromise. He simply did his job. We all stood in silence. Everyone present realized that this was the moment when one person, without a single word, broke the pride of another, without using either force or aggression. The guard remained steadfast. He did not need to win. His victory was that he remained true to his convictions. And then I realized that this moment was more than just a fight between two men. It was a test of what it means to be true to your duty. Because sometimes the real power is not the one that tears everything around it, but the one that stands still, not betraying its principles. There were minutes of silence. The general did not move. His gaze was still focused on the guard, but not with the anger he had carried until then. He seemed to be searching for answers to questions that had no easy answers. His pride began to tremble, and his confidence was crumbling right before his eyes. He was used to his word being law. And now, standing here, he realized that no title could make a person violate his principles. "I don't understand," the general finally said, his voice softer and his eyes slightly less stubborn. He was not addressing the guard, but it was a statement to everyone present. "I always thought that the army was a matter of power and submission. But here, among these walls, I see something else. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely not what I'm used to." Soon an officer who was accompanying the general approached them. I noticed how he tried to keep his movements neutral, but his face betrayed a certain surprise. He turned to the general. "General, maybe you should talk to Captain Espino. He will probably be able to explain the situation in more detail." The general nodded, but his movements were sluggish, almost automatic. He didn't even look at the guard as he walked away with the officer. At that time, the guard, without moving, returned to the group of tourists who had already lost interest in what had happened and were returning to their cameras. But I remained standing and watching. I could not forget that moment. I realized that I had seen something that turned my ideas about military discipline and respect upside down. The guard did not go to the general, did not try to justify himself, or even explain his behavior. He just did his duty. I approached him to find out more and started asking about what had happened. He looked at me with the same calm look, and I realized that he had no intention of giving answers that would satisfy my curiosity. He answered with just one short and clear sentence. "My job is to defend this post and uphold the tradition, sir. I cannot break my discipline." These words did not sound like an excuse. It was simply a statement of fact. And at that moment, I felt everything fall into place in my head. He was not here to prove his superiority or justify his role. He was here to fulfill his duty, without compromise, without regret. His mission was not about rank or relationships with other soldiers. His mission was about tradition, about respect for what he represented. I stood there and looked at him, and it became clear to me. This man, this guard, was not just a guard. He was a symbol of something bigger. He was part of a system where rules and principles mattered more than any personal pride or ambition. A few minutes later, Captain Espino came up to us and greeted the general. Jose Valencia was not the same man who had arrived here a few hours earlier. His disappointment was still on his face, but now he was calmer. He had apparently accepted the fact that you can't subjugate everyone and everything just because of your rank. The captain looked at the general and then turned to the guard, adding calmly, "What you saw today, General, is part of our system. Our guards, even when they seem unyielding, serve not only the state, but also the traditions that endow them with great power." The general did not object. He just nodded and turned around, walking to his officers. I could not forget that moment. It seems that even for a general who had experienced many conflicts and battles, there was a situation where even he could not win. And that was the moment when I realized that the greatest power is not the power of orders, but the power of duty and discipline. The guard did not win the battle. He did not fight. He simply did not violate his principles. I left, and we were all left with what we saw. It was not just a fight between two people. It was a meeting of two different worlds, two different views on what it means to be a military man, to be disciplined, and to be true to your convictions. And it is this moment that has remained in our minds as an invisible lesson that each of us learned, even if we did not want to learn it. True strength is not always about winning. Sometimes it's just staying standing, not breaking, even when the whole world is trying to break you. When General José Valencia left the Alcazar, his footsteps sounded heavy. He was no longer the man who had arrived here with the confidence that he could control any situation. He was a completely different general. It was not usual for him to have at least some loss. His eyes were no longer as proud as they used to be, but he also no longer seemed as broken as one might expect. Something had changed inside him, although he was not yet ready to realize it. After staying a few minutes longer, I realized that this was not just a fight between two people. It changed each of us. For the general, it was a test. For the guard, it was everyday life. But what I saw was more than just an event of the day. It was a life lesson that true strength is not always about winning or conquering, but about staying true to your convictions, even when everything around you is trying to break you. The guard did not change his position even after the general left the Alcazar. He remained at his post, without a single change in his posture or expression. He neither won the day nor lost it. He simply remained as he was strong, disciplined, and unwavering. His duty to the crown, to this land, was higher than any words or orders, even from such a highly regarded officer. I was impressed not only by his physical strength, but also by his inner stability. His equanimity was not only in his ability to stay still, but also in the fact that he did not allow his personality to be disturbed or broken. He didn't become a testing ground for someone else's power, and that was incredible. When I got home, I kept thinking about what happened that day. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this moment was not only a lesson for the general, but for all of us. It was a reminder that our strength is not always in controlling the situation, but in staying true to your convictions, even when the whole world is trying to change you. But it was also a lesson in self-respect and respect for others. The general began to realize that respect should not be dependent on titles and ranks. It should come from within, from the realization of who you are and why you do what you do. And although he may not have recognized it right away, this experience certainly changed his view of the world. He began to realize that there are people who retain their dignity and discipline even when they are treated differently from others. Captain Espino, who approached the guard after the general was no longer there, looked at him and nodded respectfully. He knew that his words and behavior had only confirmed what was already obvious. Discipline and duty are not just words. They are part of who you are. You did well, the captain said quietly, but in a voice the guard could hear. Your strength lies in staying true to your convictions, even when others try to change you. The guard did not answer. He just nodded quietly. He was not looking for praise or honor. His task was done. He was the one who stayed at his post, steadfast in the face of any challenge. And that was all he needed to know. If we look at it again, we can say that this moment was a lesson not only for the general, but for everyone who witnessed this event. Is there anything more important than staying true to your principles? Is there anything stronger than the calmness and discipline of someone who knows his job? This moment, this meeting of two worlds, was essentially just a moment in history, but it changed my understanding of what strength, respect, and discipline are forever. And even if we can't always understand why this happens, we do know that steadfastness in the heart and actions based on conviction are the greatest signs of true strength. I left Alcazar, but I stayed with this lesson. It will always be with me. And I realized that even in the most difficult situations, true strength is not just about winning, but about standing your ground, even when the whole world is trying to change you.